Thank you for agreeing to do the UUCV StoryCorps with us. And today we are focused on questions about your childhood. So, for our first question, can you tell us where you grew up? Tell us about your state, your city or town, maybe your neighborhood, or even your house.
So, for the most part, I grew up in a town outside of Berkeley, California, which is called El Cerrito. If you think of the San Francisco Bay, you've got San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, El Cerrito. It's a little commuter, or was a little commuter community when I was growing up there. The San Francisco Bay Area has expanded so dramatically since I was little that it's now considered like the heart of things. But when I was living there, it was like the way out boonies. When I went to high school, I was always the friend who lived, the furthest away, who had the hardest time going to stuff. And it was always a real pain, especially because I refused to learn how to drive until I was 28 years old, which is a story for a different StoryCorps day. So it wasn't precisely in Berkeley, but it definitely still had that vibe that you expect when you hear Berkeley, California. There was a lot of tie-dye. There were a lot of hippies who never left the 60s. Some of them, I think, like literally actually still thought it was the 60s. So there were a lot of people that did a lot of drugs. And so alternative religion was a big thing. Unitarian Universalism was actually maybe like a little square in comparison to some of the options that were available to you in that area for religious paths. So I grew up in essentially a suburb with a white picket fence, which I always thought was sort of ironic given how much people panicked about gay parents, how much my life looked sort of like a Norman Rockwell painting. Two parents and a kid and a dog and our white picket fence.
I can picture it.
Oh yeah, it was very sort of mission style house. It was great. It was a great place to grow up. It was full of people who, didn't always succeed, but were doing their best to try and live their values and make the world a better place. So it was a really good place to grow up, and there was really good food, so that helped too.
Nice. You mentioned your parents. Who were some of your favorite relatives growing up?
When you sent the questions, I saw that one, and it's the one that made me like maybe wiggle on this topic, because like favorite relatives, that seems like asking for trouble.
That's true.
Uh, but what I will say is like I had a lot of relatives, not necessarily in the traditional sense, although I did have grandparents and aunts and uncles. But my parents were really believed the idea that you made your own family, and that the people who were close to you, who were there for you, were your family in different ways. So I had a lot of aunties and uncles and godparents and family friends that were sort of surrounding us all of the time. Um, I had such an abundance of fabulous family. But in the interest of honoring the question, I will tell you about one of my favorite relatives who is not with us anymore, so no one else can fuss. But I had a woman who I called my grandmother. She was an extended member of the family. Her name was Minnie Finley, but we called her Cookie. And she was a woman not to be trifled with. She was over 6 feet tall and had played semi-professional sports. Badminton, which I once had the temerity to suggest that badminton was not a real sport, and she hit a badminton birdie at my head, thus proving that it might not be real, but it was certainly impressive. She was of the school of you teach a child to swim by putting them in the water and pulling and seeing what happens. I'm still here, so it worked. So she was this impressive woman. She was a school superintendent. She was the first African-American woman on the American Girl Scout Council. She was this awesome, powerful woman. And I had her wrapped around my little And my godmother likes to tell a story about how she came into breakfast one day and Cookie and I were sitting there and I was like maybe 2 feet tall, right? Cookie was 6 feet tall. And I had told Cookie that for breakfast I wanted fui cinnamon rolls, uncooked and uncutted. And so she was getting ready to give me fui cinnamon rolls. And my Nanan said, Cookie, you can't give that to her. That's too much. And she said, well, that's what the baby said she wanted. And Nanan said, but that's not what the baby needs. And she said, well, I can't tell her no. And she said, Cookie, you stand up at your full height, you look down at this small child and you say, that's too much, Aija. And she said, oh, I definitely couldn't do that. So she was much loved, and not just because I got away with murder when she was around.
She sounds like quite a person.
Well, she was.
So this may have already been answered with your cinnamon rolls story, but can you tell us about one of your happiest memories as a child?
Happiest memory as a child. I'm sure that's actually how I would categorize my childhood memories. Although that, while a memory I don't actually have, it's just been told to me so many times, is a particularly fond one. It's not like a specific thing, but I loved to read as a kid. I mean, I still love to read, but the kind of reading you do when you're younger, that transporting kind of reading, I think a lot of us, even if we grow up as readers, there's something you lose as reading becomes more and more a utility in your life, even if you still love it. But that ability to just sink in and get lost for hours and days, I was never happier than when I had my nose stuck in a book, and it was always stuck in a book, no matter what I was doing. I was very good at walking while reading, which is not safe. You shouldn't do that. It's like this up and you look and be like, okay, I'm looking. So, but that ability to just lose yourself in another world, and I don't think I have that in the same way, and it is a beautiful memory.
Yeah, I know what you mean, that childhood reading. You don't really forget that. So, when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, there were two primary options. I wanted to be a veterinarian because I was a human who was a child, and who does not want to be a veterinarian at some point when they're a child, because animals are awesome. And I wanted to be a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. And I was very clear that the Supreme Court was the way to go, because you got a lifetime tenure. So once you're there, they cannot tell you what to do. There is no going back, because I suspected that I would need the leeway. Also, I hate running for things. I always have. So, but yes, I wanted to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. That seemed extremely appealing. I mean, I didn't
want time.
Yeah, right. I'm sure I'd be super popular. I didn't want to do any of the steps you needed to do to become on the Supreme Court. I just wanted to jump to
land there.
Career path. But yes, that's what I wanted to be: Supreme Court justice, or a man who didn't have to do any science. That was the problem with that career path.
So you've already told us that you grew up Unitarian, but can you tell us what that was like being raised in a UU tradition, and a bit about how it is impacting your spiritual identity now?
Sure. So I was pretty actively raised in the church, starting at about age 3. My parents were really regular churchgoers. We went every Sunday. I went through religious education from age 4 to 18. So, once I sort of aged out of Sunday school, I was in youth group, and the idea that church was important was not really like examined in our household, or maybe my parents examined it, but it wasn't like a topic of conversation. It just was, right? Like, I'm always interested when I talk to people who are like not sure, or who question whether their kids will want to come to church, because I genuinely don't think it ever occurred to me that it was an option. Like, I mean, I'm sure I whined about it a lot, especially when we stayed after church forever and ever and ever because my parents had meetings. But that the idea that like I could opt out just didn't even occur to me. And I'm glad I didn't. I church was complicated. I got a lot of different things from it. The way you get a lot of things from any place that you love, right? That it'll support you and disappoint you and form you, and it did all of those things. It's interesting to me how many in our Unitarian Universalist churches, only 10% of people were raised Unitarian Universalist. But in our ministry, that number is significantly higher. A lot of people who are raised in the church sort of end up coming back and entering into the ministry. And that wasn't clear to me as a kid. Like you didn't hear me say one of my career goals was to be a minister. Like that occurred to me as something that I wanted to do. But the foundation was laid, right? It informed everything in ways that I couldn't really realize until I looked back and was like, oh, that was, waiting for me to be ready. And I think in terms of my personal spiritual path, what I took from it the most is that we are responsible for our beliefs. I think that people tend to emphasize in Unitarian Universalism this notion that you can believe anything, right? That's what's appealing. And first of all, you can't. And we can talk about that some other time. But there is a wide range available to us of paths, of beliefs, of faith statements, of where we place our intellectual loyalty. And it always struck me that the more important part was not the freedom, but the responsibility. If you choose, if you get to choose, if you are not just to get to, if you are invited to and asked to think deeply about what you believe, then you are responsible to those beliefs. They can't just be, oh yeah, well, I kind of believe that, right? Or, well, everyone I know believes this, so it's just, I mainly do it, right? Or it works well enough, Right. If you made that choice, then you need to take that choice seriously. And so I often fail, but I try to live my life as though I actually believe the things that I say I believe.
Well, thank you so much for participating and sharing your stories with us. I really appreciate it.
Happy to help, and I look forward to hearing other people's interviews and see what we do with this.